Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Heather Brown. I'm the Director of Grant Writing and Publications at the University of Missouri-Columbia. I am pleased to welcome you to the 4th Annual Federal Research Update webinar. This event is sponsored by the University of Missouri-Columbia, the National Association of College and University Business Officers, and the Florida High-Tech Corridor Council, an economic development initiative of the State University System of Florida. Thank you all who are joining us today. We're so pleased that you could be here. If you have any technology issues, concerns, or problems during our broadcast today, please send an email to federalupdate@missouri.edu. You can use that same email address to send any questions that you'd like our presenter to answer, and you can send those questions at any time. You don't have to wait until the question and answer period. You can send them right now. Again, that email address is federalupdate@missouri.edu. I am very pleased to welcome today Dr. David Hahn. Dr. Hahn is the Deputy Director of Research of the Office of Naval Research. The Research Directorate of ONR manages over $900 million of basic and applied research portfolios in support of the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. He became a program officer at ONR in 1995 and 3 years later joined the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory as a senior professional staff. In 2005, he was a visiting associate professor at the University of Maryland and deputy director of the Center for Energetic Concepts Development. He served as the distinguished IWS chair and professor of the Systems Engineering Department of the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis in 2007 until rejoining the ONR in 2009. Dr. Hahn, over to you.
Well, good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to participate in this webinar. Again, my name is David Hahn, and I'm the Deputy Director of Research at Office of Naval Research. Today, I'm going to talk about the Discovery and Invention portfolio, or basically the basic science and technology investment that my agency is investing, and I'll go over those in detail for you. This investment portfolios that ONR currently has, it really falls into about 4 different categories. It really is divided in terms of how fast it's going to mature into an actual technology that's going to be fielded into the fleet and the warfighters, and also how narrow or the focus of that technology area is. This is in accordance with the S&T, or Science and Technology Strategic Plan for the Navy. It's under the guidance by the Secretary of Defense and DoD. It's vetted by all the warfighters, and it's approved by the DON S&T Corporate Board. So the way it's divided in terms of the timeline is that in the very first category is called Quick Reaction S&T. This is the type that has a very narrow focus, the immediate issues that fleet has, that we invest, and we get a very quick turnaround time in no more than about 1 to 2 years. The next category, called FNC, or the Future Naval Capability, looks out into about 3 to 5 years maturing. So accordingly, the timeline is a little longer, but at the same time, the focus is a little wider than the quick reaction science and technology. The next category up is what we call innovative naval prototypes. It's looking at about 5 to 10 years of the mature cycle. And again, it would have a little wider kind of a focus because we are looking into a little further into time. But the portfolio that I'm going to be talking about that really gives me perhaps the most exciting energy is called the D&I, or the Discovery and Invention. It's really the portfolio that we look at and really look for something that is really a revolutionary, very high impact return. And therefore, the mature time we see is really more like a long-term game, looking into about 5 to 20 years. So we are looking at a technology that can be enjoyed by those who are in the kindergarten by the time they become adults. And because of this, again, the focus is much wider than the other 3. So let me talk a little more specifically in this particular portfolio. It, in fact, is the largest portfolio of the science and technology investment that my agency has. It's about 45% of the entire budget, and it's divided into roughly 2 categories. What he calls category 6.1, that's really basic research, and 6.2, which is applied research. In this case, within 6.2 we categorize it as a what you call early on applied research. Because of the basic nature, and also we are looking for very innovative and creative kind of topics, each of the program that we fund is really selected competitively. So most of these funds are really funding those researchers from the universities and research laboratories, and in some cases private corporations as well. Because we are looking at a very fundamental kinds of level of science, accordingly we see also really a side effect, which is really actually a great part of this. So far, on all those investigators that we funded, we have total of about 61 Nobel laureates. Well, actually, I would like to make a little correction. There had been 62 Nobel laureates, including the one that was just announced about 2 weeks ago. Let me just give you a quick update on that. Dr. David Wineland has been announced as a recipient of the Nobel Prize in Physics in year 2012. In his pioneering work and really the ability that he had shown in manipulating and measuring individual quantum systems. One of the examples that he worked on is called quantum logic-enabled aluminum ion clock that has shown the accuracy of about 1 second in 32 billion years. If you're interested in really checking the accuracy of this clock, I would encourage your longevity here. But nevertheless, Dr. Wineland has kind of accumulated all these accolades over the years, but one thing that I would like to emphasize is that he's been our investigator since 1978. So we're talking over 30 years of really prolonged and very persistent investment and really trusting his ability on the ONR's part to really see something really revolutionary coming from him. And it's been a very fruitful kind of an investment in the end. But just to really give you sort of why we are looking at the basic research, what is so great about playing this long game? You have some kind of I guess, expectations, but let me give you a good example that everybody is really familiar with. It's an old technology actually by now. It's been around for almost 20 years now. Those smartphones that you own, most of them have this thing called GPS. But the GPS system is only possible because we could measure time in an extreme high accuracy. ONR has invested in this basic science of really ability to look at the quantum effects and really utilizing that to make a very fine measurement of time. That made it possible to come up with a very high accurate clock that eventually was transitioned into the satellites that would now give you the kind of great service of GPS. Initially it was a great success for the naval as well as DoD applications, and now in the civilian sector really enjoys that fruit of the initial labor. Of course, again, let me tell you that it's been around for about almost 20 years. So the initial investment in this area, we are dating all the way back to in the 60s. Oh, by the way, let me brag one more thing, and that is that along this path, we also collected, or I mean, not ONR, but those who were funded by ONR collected no less than about 4 Nobel Prizes, in total of 5 Nobel laureates. The slide that is shown right now is slightly off in numbers, and we'll be updating it shortly. Okay, so now that was the yesterday technology. What about today? What is really the kind of a revolutionary product that we are delivering now? One is called the Widebandgap semiconductor devices. This is the one that is semiconductor that really has the operating range at a very high temperature, which enables you to really put it into a very extreme conditions and still perform really well. So for the naval applications where you need a very high RF amplifications operating at a very high temperature, but you want a very compact size, this material turned out to be really the right candidate. And currently it is fielded in platforms such as E2D, as well as NOLCA, which is a countermeasure devices. But this other thing that I want to talk about is actually really something that really excited me quite recently. You all heard about the exhaustive coverage by the media of the hurricane we all experienced in the Northeast. The forecasting of hurricanes, tropical cyclones, been around for some times now, but one of the remaining thing that really all these forecasters had difficulties in is not so much about really predicting which way this is going to go. The models that we had a steady improvement over the years, but intensity, how strong is that hurricane is going to be? That was something that the researchers really had trouble with. Over really a prolonged time, we really didn't have much of improvements in the intensity forecasts until recently, though. This new module called COAM and COAM-TC, which is a mesoscale model that's added into the current overall model, gave such a high accuracy prediction of the intensity that was really the one that was used in really predicting how strong Sandy was going to be. And it's not exactly the best time to really talk about how great this tool is, given the condition that a lot of people are really suffering from this horrendous damage. But you probably have heard of this hurricane's forecast way in advance. Everybody was informed how strong this was going to be, which way it's going to go, and a lot of predictions were really right on target. And this is primarily because of the D&I, or the discovery and invention investment that ONR made for the last 10 or 15 years now comes into fruition. And it is really going to be in transition into the fleet in the weather forecasting model. For the Sandy prediction, it was implemented at the very last minute. And that really benefited not only the military folks, but also the civilian sector. So there you go. You can see the return on the investment that you make over like 20 years. And it's not small increments. It's really a big impact, very high payoff. So now let's sort of then predict what future is going to be like. We are making investments now. And if you ask me what kind of wonderful product that we're going to be able to deliver in the next 10 to 15 years, that is not an easy thing to do, because if you look back, nobody really expected how wonderful of the technology, information system, or internet was. Nobody really predicted in the 60s or 70s of that. We were talking more of space voyages and things of that nature. So we may not be very accurate in exactly what future will bring. But this is one thing that I can promise you, and that is that whatever it is, on this investment that we make today, the return on the investment is going to be revolutionary. It's going to be something that would change the lifestyle, the way even we think, how we interact, how we live our lives. That's the kind of high impact kind of return that we expect from the kind of investments we make today. One example of such potential future product or the technology revolution that we foresee is on this new material called graphene. You probably have heard about carbon nanotubes. If you somehow unlink this tube into a sheet of carbon materials all interlinked, sort of like a honeycomb structure, that's what you call graphene. It has a very interesting property. It's the best conductor, electrical conductor at room temperature known to man. But if you change that a little bit, and turn it into a hybrid product such as hydrocarbon by adding hydrogens to it, it turns into a very good insulator. So there's a lot of speculation what this new material can bring to us in the future. A lot of people are forecasting that really a complete rewrite of the way that we construct electronic circuits, for instance, different devices and measuring devices and so on. So a lot of excitements on this particular material. Oh, by the way, again, another bragging. This material was discovered by Dr. Andre Geim, and again, he won a Nobel Prize. And of course, he was funded by ONR. So, the immediate customer that we are trying to support is obviously Navy and Marine Corps. Of course, you have seen a lot of civilian derivatives of the product that was really meant initially for the military. But let me talk about how immediate customers' needs are. Okay, one area is called assured access to maritime battlespace. Navy, unlike Navy and Marine Corps, unlike any other services, really is subjected to and very sensitive to in their operations what their environment is like. The ocean is a very unforgiving kind of an environment, and weather, again, is in such a magnitude that your sentiment about how small your ship is versus how large the ocean is really right on the mark. And therefore, we really have to be able to understand and be able to predict, like the way we did it with Sandy, about what the environment, what the weather is like, how the temperature distribution is like on the sea, what acoustic sensors or RF sensors is going to perform in this environment is very important. Another area that we are trying to develop the product for is autonomous and unmanned systems. More and more, U.S. military is really going toward unmanned or autonomous operating systems, partly because we want to keep the man out of the dangerous operations. And because of that, we need to be really at a leading edge in this kinds of technology. And because of the situation that we are facing since 9/11, we are really more in military operation-wise into what you call expeditionary and unconventional or irregular warfare. We called it asymmetric warfare. So the other guy is not necessarily fighting like a conventional army. And accordingly, we really have to fight in a very different way. And obviously for that, to support that kind of an operation, we need a whole new set of technology, whole new set of ways of operating in that kind of a scenario. So that's another area that we need to support. And needless to say, knowledge is power. More information you have, more encompassing that information is and relevant to that situation, more power you have. And so dominance in what you know and really understanding the situation from really myriads of information that is really fed into the user and how to really collate them, correlate them, filter it, and leading to the decision-making process is a very important aspect. And because we are Navy and Marine Corps, we are also very concerned about the platforms because they are operating in a very harsh environment. And so how do we design a ship? How do we design an airplane that can endure the kinds of the harsh conditions? How do we then also design ships or the platforms that can really be multi-purpose, that it can be designed in a smart way that you can really fit in many different kinds of materials, of supplies? These are some of the key issues that the Navy and the Marine Corps faces as well. And more, the issue of the power is getting more attention in the military operation as well as into the civilian sector. How do we come up with a power source that's high enough, in overall peak power, as well as energy that has a long endurance, but overall low cost at a very low size, compact form? And that's really of an interest to the military as well as the civilian sector. How do we project our power from the sea to nearshore littorals? Because these are the situations that U.S. Navy is getting into more often nowadays. So how do we project our power? And then in asymmetric environment, in third world port where you may have a small boats approaching your ship, how do you really protect your ship? How to protect our forces better? How do we do the defense in an integrated way? This is another topic. And regardless of how wonderful technology is, how wonderful the system might be, if it is too expensive, it really is not much of a help to us. So how do you really keep the overall cost down? Affordable total ownership cost is another very important topic. Lastly, but not the least, warfighter performance. After all, it doesn't matter what kind of tools, platforms, materials, technology we have. I think the greatest asset we have is our men and women, the warfighters serving in the military. How can we protect them better? How can we understand their physiology so that we can ensure that they are performing at their very best? That's another issue. So these are sort of the products that we would like to deliver to the Navy and the Marine Corps. So where do we invest? What are the scientific topics that we want to focus? Of course, there are other services, there are other research organizations that invest in many similar technologies and basic science. So we really need to limit ourselves and say, where is really the best area that's most appropriate for us to invest? So we have these topics called National Naval Responsibilities. These are the responsibilities ONR take up as because no one else is doing it. Topics such as ocean acoustics, or undersea weapons, naval engineering, or undersea medicine, and sea-based aviations. These are all very naval-specific kind of topics that ONR really focuses on in our investments. And there are a couple of additional topics that are being considered as new candidates in this category. And one is precision time and timekeeping. Obviously, and I'm not going to be really emphasizing the importance of keeping an accurate time. But then also another topic that is being considered is really finding ways to provide a communication channel between air-water interface, because we have platforms operating under the water, on the water, and in space and air. So how do we really create that kind of a channel along all this medium? That's another topic that is being considered as another candidate. In addition to these naval national responsibilities, we also have other areas of emphasis, such as autonomous science. As I mentioned, more and more autonomous systems coming into the service. So we need to look into this. How can we make these machines smart, really truly autonomous? Because when they say unmanned systems, it may not necessarily mean autonomous systems. You may have about a dozen people trying to control that platform. So it's not truly autonomous. What we are talking about is a machine that's intelligent enough that it can make its own decisions based on its sensor information as well as understanding its surroundings. Bio-inspired science is another area that I believe is really having huge payout potentials. Because after all, when you look at nature, these animals that operate in very harsh environments, their adaptation behaviors as well as the way that biology evolved over millions of years is really based on many trial and error. Why not utilize that? Why not exploit that and see how we can use it in terms of putting into an unmanned system or in our sensors and so forth? Because we need to support our warfighters, we need to understand better on how our neural and cognitive system is. And utilizing that information, then we can perhaps come up with new ways of training our warfighters. But another emerging area is that by understanding our ways of processing information through our sensor systems, we can perhaps find new ways of really teaching robots how to really figure out things. So there are really two folds of kind of returns that you can reap from looking into this particular topic. Information technology sciences, of course, there's really no additional emphasis needed. More you know, but how you know by really correlating the information and really filtering it so that you can come up with the right decision, and how to really communicate that information and that knowledge in the network is really a very important aspect. Advanced computing. This has been sort of the search, and it's going to be a continuous search. How do we come up with better computers? How do we come up with a better hardware as well as better software? As you may all know, the Moore's law that's been in place for the last 20 or 30 years, actually it's more than about nearly half a century now, is actually breaking down. We're not seeing that kind of rapid progression of the computational speed that was predicted by the Moore's law. So we are really reaching that limitations in current electronics, partly because we really can't pack any more than what we can really cool in that particular spot, and really reaching the limits of the speeds of light. Many issues in hardware. And so you hear more about multi-core systems, multi-core machines. So accordingly, we have to come up with this new hardware approaches that would still continue this speed increase that we expect every year. But at the same time, because of this changing in hardware, we need to think about how we can come up with a better software, better ways of solving these complicated problems. Materials, obviously. We need to come up with a more advanced, more tailor-made, and also the material that really starts from the manufacturing end all the way to its performance end. So we got to be able to string it all together and say, by designing this kind of material in the end, you have to really start with this kind of process, this kind of raw materials, so that you really optimize in the end the product. An additional area that is really of a great excitement is such as metamaterials, as you may have heard. The metamaterials in RF as well as metamaterials in acoustic regime really is a great, very exciting area right now. And counter-ID science. This is a problem that's going to be with us for really a long time, I believe. And it's a very hard problem. What we've been so far searching for, the silver bullet, it may not exist. But with the science and technology investments, we may be able to find something close to it in the end. But it is a very persistent, very hard problem, and it's also an evolving problem. So it really needs a very well-focused investment as well. And so, as I described you about the product that we need to develop and also the science and technology investment areas that we are currently putting in for the research, how do they all really fold in? Let me just give you a sort of overall picture. So, with basic and applied research developed under our portfolio, with those end products in mind and those topical areas, they mature, and they may mature in a timeline of anywhere from 5 to 20 years, as I mentioned. What are the mechanisms do we have to really put it into the fleet? After certain levels of maturity or some promising results from D&I, the next step might be something like future naval capability, as I mentioned earlier. Those are the ones that has about 3 to 5 year timeline to be fielded into the fleet. Another option, if it is not as mature, is then to consider about the INP, or Innovative Naval Prototype, which has a timeline of about 5 to 10 years. For a smaller scale, but more innovative kind of solutions that has been sort of shown in feasibility, we can pursue such as SBIR, Small Business Innovative Research. And occasionally we also have science and technology from the D&I that becomes mature enough that they may get fielded directly to the fleet. And because these are all starting out from a basic science, we often find them to mature into not only military applications, but also the civilian sector as well. So oftentimes, a lot of investments that we put into turn into a dual-use technology, just like GPS, for instance. So as I describe these processes, let me move on then. What are the mechanisms in my directorate that actually really use in the process-wise to really conduct this overall D&I portfolio? As you can see on the screen, there are about half a dozen or more of the mechanisms that we have. URI, University Research Initiatives, DURIPS, MURI, and these things, I'll go over them specifically in the following slides. But of course, you know, you probably are wondering about, well, so much for that overall motivations and all the mechanisms, but where's the dollars? How much are we talking about? Basic research portfolio that ONR has is about $600 million a year. Okay, of those, about $117 million are executed by the Naval Research Laboratory. About another $113 million is expended on the University Research Initiative, which I will describe immediately following these slides. And the rest, about $355 million, they are executed by ONR individual departments. We have 6 departments overall, in the departmental structure, and they have their own specific focus areas. So let me go over, well, actually, the next slide is again the money charts. For the 6.2 applied research, we have about $313 million. About a third is taken up by the NRL's portion, and the other 2/3 is mostly executed by ONR. Again, divided by those 6 departments I just mentioned earlier. So, university research initiatives. There are mainly 3 components. DURIP, which stands for Defense University Research Instrumentation Program, MURI, Multidisciplinary University Research Initiative, and PCASE, Presidential Early Career Award for Science and Engineers. DURIP is mainly to allow our researchers to purchase a very high-cost instrumentations or equipments that's essential in for conducting their research, funded by ONR. So, for instance, Dr. Peter Trajkovsky from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute purchased the acoustic Doppler velocimeter, which was used to really track the movements of the sediments in the Louisiana mud shelf. The grants range in the size from $50,000 to $1.5 million. And it's a very competitive process. So about 270 proposals were received last year, but we were able to fund almost about 100 proposals. So it's not really a complete lottery. I think it's got a reasonable chance if you have a very good justifiable proposal, then I really encourage all of you to really submit your proposals. The largest portfolio within the URI is called Multidisciplinary University Research Initiative. Because this program is looking at these scientific topics that involves multidisciplines. Typically, we have a proposal constructed from multiple disciplinary teams, some biologists teaming up with engineers and physicists, neuroscientists, all working together to form up a team. And because of the multidiscipline teams, you often end up multi-university teams as well. And again, it's a very competitive process. Typical awards is about $1.5 million a year for the duration of about first 3 years and an option of 2 years as an extension. Last year, there were about 9 awards. And the PCASE is really the investment we make for those super outstanding superstars of our performing corps that we expect some wonderful things in their career. We expect things such as Nobel Prizes from them, for instance. Early career awards, so they're eligible only within about 5 years of receiving their PhDs. But those who really have shown really great promises. One example is Dr. Robert Wood from Harvard. He developed this flapping insect wing that's about the size of a fly. And he's really under the program to really develop something that's of the size of a micro UAV, that's about the size of a fly flying. So it's really something that really is very impressive just by looking at their proposal as well as their overall achievement they made in that short professional career. Another component is defense research science. It's divided into about 4 different parts: basic research science, basic research challenge, young investigators program, historically black colleges and universities and minority institutions program, and ONR Core 6.1 programs. Of those 4, I'm just going to talk very briefly on the last item, which is ONR's Core 6.1 program. Again, as I mentioned, this is one of the largest piece of 6.1 program, but these are all executed by individual department within the ONR. There are 6 departments, and they all have these basic emphasis areas, such as Code 33 is primary focus is in expeditionary warfare. And Code 32, for instance, is battle space environment. or Code 34, for instance, is really looking into the warfighter performance. So they all have their sort of special disciplines that they tailor their 6-1 core portfolio accordingly. HBCU and MI also is a separate program that we invest into the HBCU MI institutions to really additionally promote their participations in basic research, also encourage their students in scholarships and fellowships over summer. And the other two that I have in the early on topics, I'm going to talk about it quickly here. Basic Research Challenge. This is sort of an interesting program within ONR. Actually, it's a very exciting program. Before I became the deputy director, I used to be a program officer or a program director within ONR organization. And typical job for a program manager or program director is to review others' proposals. We are on the judge's side of the table and looking at others' proposals and make the selections. In the case of BRC, the role gets reversed. So the program manager or program directors, we call them program officers at ONR, has to come up with a proposal. Often we encourage them to work, cross-departmental, disciplinary kind of projects in their proposal topics. So they work in teams and come up with these proposals and submit to my directorate. And they get judged. And annually it's really competed in a very competitive way, in a very transparent process of evaluations. And we select a certain number of those proposals over the period of about 4 years to really come up with some achievements in the end. And so the roles reverse. Oftentimes program officers would say, well, my days of writing proposals is over when they come to ONR from the university, but that's not quite the case in BRC, and that's what makes it actually very exciting on this program. Young Investigators Program. This is sort of a stepping stone to the PCASE award that I mentioned earlier. This is, again, an award really to promote acceleration of career development for young investigators, those who began their tenure track career for within last 5 years. And it's, again, a very competitive process. Last year, I believe we have about 26 awards. But when you win this award, you have one overall nice title. But also, more importantly, you will be receiving about $170,000 research funds for 3 years. So that is really a very nice prize for you to really accelerate your career, your really focus area, that you can really become world-class investigators. Of course, these candidates who apply for these programs generally are already a world-class investigators to begin with, but the intent is really to accelerate their career. And we also have a very small portion that goes to Navy laboratories called in-house laboratory independent research. And we really try to focus this investment into basic research as much as we can. But we also have another component called IAR, in-house applied research, which has what we call more of an applied research flavor to it. From that very small investment in the order of about no more than about $22 million a year or so, divided among more than a dozen Navy laboratories, we have a pretty good return on investment. I'll just talk about one quick example of a stern flap developed by NSWC, or Naval Surface Warfare Center, Cottle Rock, located near DC area. They came up with this device called stern flap that's attached at the tail end of the surface ship, which reduces the surface waves from the stern end of the ship that really minimize the energy expenditure, reduces the drag. And this device, being shown as such an effective approach, now is adopted over about 170 ships in the US Navy as well as Coast Guards. Up to year 2012, I believe in February, they tallied up and estimated the total fuel savings, and it turned out to be about $800 million. So it is a very impressive kind of a device that really brought us really a big return on the investment. But on all these programs that I mentioned, except some few exceptions, just about most of them undergo what you call peer review process. The intent is to ensure that the investments being made are really done in the most appropriate way, the competitive and transparent way, and that really that research quality is maintained at the highest level possible. So every 2 or 3 years, each of the programs that we fund, all the way down to the departmental core programs, gets reviewed by an external panel. And their review on individual performing investigators receives comments and overall ratings. And by considering their reviews and comments, each of these programs gets adjusted accordingly. And we feel that this is a very important and necessary step to ensure that the tax dollars, the precious basic research dollars, are really spent in the most efficient way. So I'm going to talk about something else now. I mean, it's all within discovery and invention components, but another important area that really is grabbing a lot of attention nationally, and you probably have heard the term called STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In DON and DOD, this becomes of a major concern right now because leadership looked at our workforce in terms of their disciplines in the areas of STEM and realized that by year 2020, we'll be losing about half of that force from just retirements. Of course, U.S. is still really the destination for all these wonderful foreign scientists and engineers. We continue to really enjoy the benefit of this intellectual influx coming to the country. Unfortunate thing, though, is that they're not the U.S. citizens. So for naval-related research and science and technology, U.S. citizenship is required, and often those foreigners may not be able to participate and really support this very important area for the naval science. So this is becoming a very increasing concern. Just by looking at the trends, the number of degrees awarded to the U.S. citizens for the last 15 years hasn't really changed a whole lot. But when you look at another country like China, for instance, the number of those diplomas really increased very dramatically, as shown in this chart here. Secretary of the Navy stressed that this is really a very high priority, that we needed a concerted effort and a focused program in STEM to promote science and technology in our workforce. And we need to do it in a very systematic way. It's not just for the Navy, but overall, country can really benefit a lot if you improve overall science, math and science scores by, say, about half of a standard deviation. This would translate into nearly about 1% of the GDP. So it's an incredible return on the investment we make. If we can make that kind of an improvement in overall student performance, the reward is really tremendous. So what's the approach? We see this as really a very pressing area, and we set these priorities and the themes. We want to keep this and maintain the diversity. Best practices has to be implemented, collaboration is the key word, and maintain the naval relevance in this particular topic. We also gotta be able to measure it, really measure the success, measure the failures, and really adjust the program accordingly. And then we need to go viral. We need to really find ways to really make this an expanding area, both demographics-wise as well as geographically. So this is sort of the way that we take as an approach. It's sort of similar in the way that ONR's investment portfolios are sort of structured. We look at both near term to a very long term. So if you want scientists, we want to start right now that can influence a quick change in the next 2-3 years by reaching into graduate schools, undergraduates. But we also want to reach into really early on education stage of kindergarten all the way to high school. And those are our future scientists and engineers. So accordingly, we have to structure the program to really attract their interests. Say, for instance, in the elementary to a high school, we want to maintain it such that it's fun, interesting, exciting. And we want to really implement programs that would really correlate to those excitements, such as robotic competitions, science fairs. And as they go into high schools and move on to the universities, then we want to promote their interest in the area in terms of scholarships, internships, fellowships, and summer opportunities. And then once they move on to the faculty level, then we really want to accelerate their careers by the PCASE, Early Career Awards, and so on. And so, these are some of the programs that we have so far funded in the STEM area. Perch, for instance. It's really a middle school activity of robot constructions and competitions nationwide. And we really have a very incredible success. Student to teacher ratio, participation-wise, is like 35,000 students and about 4,000 teachers. I mean, this is really an exciting results. And as far as the minority participation goes, of those who are participating is about 45% minority. So we are really reaching all the way to all the demographics. And we want to really encourage this kind of programs. A CEP, for instance, here is really a high school internship program that's coupled with a naval laboratory. So high school students can spend their summers at naval laboratories and really getting into cool, real naval research. Once they get into college, then they can participate in a program called NRED, which is sort of similar, providing internships at the naval laboratories at a more matured and more advanced levels. So these are some of the programs that we are funding right now. And currently, we are just about on the verge of putting out the announcement for the so-called FOA, which is Funding Opportunity Announcement. It's sort of similar to BAA, but it's going to be on ONR's BAA website. It's really specific in delineating what kind of proposals, what kind of ideas we're looking for in promoting STEM. And so once it gets on the website, we really anticipate there's going to be a large response, because STEM is really one area, I think, that really doesn't really require a whole lot of motivations on any part, because a lot of people recognize that this is a problem not only for the naval and military, but at the national level. And so that's sort of a quick rundown of the STEM. So I believe that is my last slide. And again, I would like to thank you for your participation and listening in on this webinar. And I really encourage your participation and your proposals, great ideas, innovative ideas to ONR. I really do encourage contacting us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hahn. Now we're going to open it up to questions. If you have questions that you'd like Dr. Hahn to answer, please send your emails to federalupdate@missouri.edu. Again, that email is federalupdate@missouri.edu. We have one question. Does ONR consider proposals from single PIs that are for small amounts between $50,000 and $100,000 per year?
Absolutely. Typically, university research grants actually ranges in that size. Might get a little larger than that, but one of the smaller size might be something like funding of graduate students and maybe just a few weeks of faculty summer salaries. So it falls right in that range that was specified.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the proposal process and peer review process works?
Okay, those are really two separate processes. So as far as the proposal process goes, ONR typically handles soliciting new ideas in the following way. Writing a proposal is really a major investment on those who are writing it. It takes typically, based on my own experience as a university faculty, may take up to about a month just to write one very good proposal. So it really requires a lot of investment on the writer, but at the same time, for ONR program officers, it also requires a lot of time to review that proposal, to really provide the adequate evaluation. And therefore, we have sort of what you call pre-proposal stage or the process. Typically, we call that a planning letter or white paper process. And each individual program may have slight variations. But overall, in the early part of the calendar year, program officers solicit planning letters or white papers in the range of about 4 pages long, maybe, with the performer's CV. And so that may not really require a whole lot of investment on those who are submitting the proposal. And at the same time, that would allow us to really quickly review these planning letters and really decide whom to invite for writing or submitting the proposal. Of course, when we say no to white papers or planning letters, it doesn't mean that you can't write proposals to us. Anybody who has really innovative ideas can always submit proposals to us. It's just that by going through that process, you as a proposal writer may not have to really waste your investment in writing it when a program officer may not really see much of chance of really having that idea funded. So that's proposal writing and submittal and evaluation process, kind of given in about no more than about 3 minutes. And if you need some additional clarifications, you can always follow up with additional questions. My contact information, I believe, is going to be posted on this webinar. So you are encouraged to do that. For peer review process, it's really a completely separate component. It's more of looking into individual program officers' ways of managing and directing their research portfolios. So it's really opening up that portfolio to an external panel and get sort of like graded on how effective the overall program was, and also individual project-wise, how successful, how high quality that research was. So with this peer review process, my directorate takes into consideration about how to really change that particular program, and the program officer would work with us to really come up with right adjustments so that in the following peer review time goes, then you would see some improvements in the change. So that's really sort of 2 separate kinds of processes.
Thank you very much. Again, if you have questions that you'd like Dr. Hahn to answer, please send them to federalupdate@missouri.edu. We have a question that has come in about the upcoming STEM FOA. The questioner wants to know if universities will be able to compete for that, or if it's going to be limited to, say, K-12 only.
As I mentioned in my presentation, we really look at K through 12 as well as to the universities. So you certainly are welcome to submit proposals on FOA. But FOA will really provide much more detail about what are the topical areas, what are the institutions and organizations that would be encouraged to participate, and so on. So, but certainly university related project would be welcomed as well.
Thank you again. If you have questions, please send them to federalupdate@missouri.edu. Some researchers want to know if it's possible, and if so, can they volunteer to be reviewers on proposals?
That's a very interesting question. NSF actually operates slightly different than the way that ONR operates in evaluating the proposals. NSF goes by the committees, and so really a large portion of the activities for program director is really to form up review committees and providing and really inviting the review panel members. ONR operates a little bit differently, but it depends on individual program officers. They sometimes utilize external help in evaluating certain proposals because that program officer may not necessarily have the right kind of technical background. And so each individual program officers, at their disposal, they can invite evaluators from the universities or Navy laboratories, or other program officers within the building who has the necessary discipline. One issue that we try to be careful in, and it's tackled by the NSF as well, is really about disclosure of the content that's being submitted by our proposal writers, submitters. And so we need to be very sensitive in ensuring that that intellectual value of the proposal gets protected. So with that guideline, I think individual program officers would operate with that principle.
Thank you. If you have a question, again, please send it to federalupdate@missouri.edu. Have a very long question here. Universities are about the last to be open to making the changes that are necessary to make STEM careers attractive. Many high schools are making dramatic improvements in their curriculum, making it exciting and challenging. But universities, for the most part, have stuck to the old disciplinary approaches and lecture styles of courses. Imagine the effect on a young student who came out of a dynamic STEM program in high school, entering college and finding him or herself in a Biology 101 class with 1,499 other students. How can ONR and other mission-oriented funders push colleges to make science and math fun?
I think that's a wonderful question. I'm the deputy director on what you call discovery and invention. Within my directorate, actually, there's another deputy director really who has a primary focus of STEM. So he probably would give you a much better answer than what I'm about to provide. But within my purview, I believe that the person who posed the question really is asking the right question. That was another frustration I felt as a faculty myself. In addition to being a parent to two boys who studied in science and engineering. And university often is not necessarily as friendly of an environment, as encouraging of an environment in science and technology. And there are many factors, I think, that really works in that way. Although it really depends on which university, I think. We cannot really generalize it. Some, liberal arts and colleges are really excellent institutions. For instance, when I was a faculty at the Naval Academy, our primary mission was really to instruct midshipmen. And so our time was mostly devoted in teaching students how to keep it interesting, how to really come up with new ways of instructions. And so I believe there's a huge room in the way that we can improve in how we can instruct our undergraduates. And maybe that the word that I just used is even outdated as well. How do we inspire them? How do we really make them exciting? Because once they are on that track, you really don't need all the hand-holding along the way, because they're already an adult. They usually can find their ways once you really get them up to that mode. So how do you really bring that kind of an excitement in class? I think that is really what's really kind of being faded away in the university environment nowadays, partly because I think the competitiveness in the research environment in the typical research-oriented universities. And I believe we need a little bit of a better calibration or adjustments. But it's not an easy thing really to really change that, but it needs maybe concerted efforts both from the university as well as research organizations and those particularly the faculties. You need also the faculties who really has the passion of teaching as well as research to really see and really nurture the new talents in seeing them really following their own steps so that you can really produce next generation scientists. I believe a good portion of that is really done in graduate level, but undergraduate is where you also need that kind of a, a very intimate and very interactive kind of environment between the faculty and the students. There are many tools actually out there right now that can be adopted into the classroom. These lecture series by other university that they put up in the web. If you feel that your time that you spend on preparing lectures is probably not best investment, but rather really spend on exercises and recitations and really showing some live examples may be more effective. Perhaps a faculty should really just refer to a lecture that was given that's reviewed as really an excellent instruction set and say, you go and look at that lecture material and then now come back to me and we'll have some fun in the laboratory, for instance. These are sort of alternative ways of instructions, I believe, that needs to be injected. University, it's an environment that really keeps to the tradition, but we are really moving in a very different information age, and conveying that information also has to change, I believe.
Thank you very much. A little bit more of a practical question, less philosophical. What is the rate of success for proposals submitted in response to program managers' request for proposal based on the planning letter?
Okay, for success rate, once you're invited for proposal, again, it depends on each individual program officers. But your success rate, once you get invited for writing the proposal, is much higher than your rate when you submit your planning letters, typically. Based on my own experience as a program officer, the ratio was probably about 1 in 3 or 1 in 2, or even better. It depends. So, once we make the commitment on our part in saying that I'm willing to look at your proposal in detail and really try to evaluate it and really come up with the decision, that means it's not necessarily a commitment per se for the funding, but at least on program officers time-wise, they're making that commitment for inviting someone to write the proposal.
Thank you. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. If you have a question that you'd like Dr. Hahn to answer, please send it to federalupdate@missouri.edu. Otherwise, if something happens to come up in your mind later on today, even tomorrow, the next, always feel free to send us an email at federalupdate@missouri.edu. We'll go ahead and make sure that gets to Dr. Hahn. He also has his contact information in his presentation. Are there any last questions? If not, I'm going to say thank you, Dr. Hahn, very much. It was a great pleasure to have you here today. And we are going to begin again tomorrow with Jeremy Leffler from the National Science Foundation, who will be here at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 8:30 a.m. Central Time. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.